The price and prize of a good quest is a good death, not at the end of life. The point is to die before we die. But what dies? What part of us? In a lot of myths, we find a sacrificial animal like a treasure that the hero may receive to achieve his own ritual death. This animal isn't the malevolent beast, often a dragon, that must be slain. We'll get to that. It's a holy creature. The sacrifice in question does concern the hero intimately. It is the male hero's self-sacrifice, his deathly ordeal or slaughtering of his animal self, which in Hellenic tradition is usually linked to the slaughter of the bull in particular, the holy bull. And this is equivalent to the holy lamb in biblical terms. The myth of the Minotaur provides a catalog of relevant symbols in this regard. We have Minos, the king of Crete, receiving a white bull from the gods. He had asked for a sign with which to dispel the pretensions of those who would be king over him, and he receives it, the bull. It's white, like the sun, luminous, but it emerges from the depths, from the waters, because it comes from Poseidon. So the waters of the deep unconscious, if we want to frame this in psychological terms, contain our animal self, our vital instincts. But he thinks it's too beautiful to slay, to sacrifice, as he was supposed to do. He is weak, vain, too much so to slaughter his animal self. And as a result, his wife, the queen, will also be defiled. When the male is weak, the female is corrupted. For the queen soon finds the bull and actually finds it so beautiful that she joins with it and births a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull, the Minotaur. The figure of the man who has not slain his animal self, so that his higher faculties, the head, the mind, become beastly, become occupied by the animal, by the passions. That's the Minotaur. So we can say Minos, the weak king, the weak will, leads to the soul, the sensual part of the self, becoming ensnarled and joining with the animal self. And as a result, we become a Minotaur. And the Minotaur must live in a labyrinth. Our mind and soul soon become tortuously complicated, a prison full of winding paths and dead ends. The monster demands young sacrifices in particular. That's also allegorical. Our joys and passions in life will not mature. They will fall prey to the Minotaur within. Enter the heroic masculine and feminine. To set right the weakness of Minos and the wantonness of his queen, Theseus has to kill the monstrous ego, the Minotaur, and he does this by stabbing its throat. For we must cease listening to the animal self, the passionate ego. Theseus then finds his way out of the maze, not by thinking, not by trying to reckon all of its winding paths, but by feeling. He does not escape through the mind, but by the sense of touch, following the thread given to him by the feminine. This is key. The male will can slay the beast, but may not be able to navigate the labyrinth of the mind, or of the passions, for its tendency is to think its way out, which is precisely what the labyrinth represents, a complicated mind. He must feel his way out. He must be called out by the attraction of the feminine, life, nature, the world, the will to participate in the world, in nature. But just as King Minos went astray, Theseus does likewise. He rejects Ariadne, like Jason rejecting Medea, who had helped him so. In a sense, this is as it should be, because the will has to now be transformed. By killing the Minotaur, we are going to undergo a transformation. By defeating itself in the form of a monstrous ego, it recreates itself. It makes itself, in a sense, higher, angelic, divine. Thus to Ariadne comes a husband worthy of her, a god, Dionysus. And we can view this same motif in the rescue of Theseus from the underworld by the hero Heracles. The myth of Zeus taking the form of a white bull and spiriting Europa away from her Phoenician home in Tyre to Crete, whereupon he takes his human form to join with her. That's the implication is the inverse of the Minotaur myth. In both cases, the bull is white, luminous, related to the sun. In both cases, however, it's also related to the waters. Zeus, in the form of a white bull, traverses the waters. You find the same duality in the sacrificial animal of the Rig Veda in India, the horse that is said to proceed both from Yama, god of death, and the sun, or from the sea and the upper waters. There's also cattle sacrifices in the Vedas following cattle raids, and oxen are offered to Indra in the Rig Veda at one point, but the horse sacrifice is central. We're not going to get into the wider symbolism of the horse, however. The horse on which the pale rider rides in the Apocalypse, Pegasus in the case of Hercules, that would be another topic. The bull in particular has this duality built into its symbolism. The horns can be a crescent moon, or they can be the sliver of solar light seen during an eclipse. In fact, the Zeus-Europa union has been theorized to relate to the solar eclipse observances in Minoan culture. The oxen of the sun trope in Greek mythology presents us with a holy animal, perhaps the lunar receptive portion of the soul, but in the image of the solar, precisely because it is receptive and purified. This is similar to the submissive lamb in the Bible and the lion that represents the same figure as the lamb, Christ, and is clearly solar. The horned animal relates to this duality, but on another level. The instincts, like horns, keep the mind between two forces, aversion and attraction, desire and derision, but these can also be positive once tamed. Whereas Minos's wife unites not with him but with his animal, conceiving the Minotaur, a hybrid monster, Zeus unites with Europa successfully and produces, according to Pseudo-Apollodorus, several children, Minos among them. So there's a decline of the ages, a break in generations that has occurred, with Minos failing where Zeus succeeded. Minos does not properly sacrifice and integrate the animal self. Crete is important because, according to Proclus, the celebrations held there every year in honor of the enthronement of Zeus are the very center of Hellenic observance, spirituality. According to Porphyry, Pythagoras himself sacrificed and was initiated. You bring your animal self to the holy mountain. If we think of Solomon sacrificing at the temple in 2 Chronicles, where the temple represents Mount Sinai, where the Mosaic law was received, and the Holy of Holies is the very peak, let's say the highest point of the mountain is the innermost of the temple, you have an equivalence. And this occurs throughout traditions. Theseus, unlike Minos, is not a failure. He's an ambiguous success. A clear success, however, occurs in the case of Odysseus. In contrast, a clear failure occurs with Jason the Argonaut. Let's get into the Odyssey. In Book 19 of Homer's Odyssey, Penelope explains that dreams reach mortals via one of two portals, two gates, so that some are deceptive and others true. One dream gate is made of horn and gives forth true dreams, and one of ivory sends us false ones. She has just dreamt a dream that suggests Odysseus will return to her, but does not know if it's true and actually doubts that it is. Horn here, related to the holy bull figure, may be taken to represent the slain beast. Once the bull or animal self is slain or subdued, our dreams are purified and we may return from the hero's journey. And sure enough, Odysseus has slain bulls as part of religious rites in the Odyssey, but things go wrong in this regard. In Book 19, he encounters the oxen of the sun, the holy bulls of the sun god, and these cattle are guarded by women, by two daughters of the sun, Phaethusa and Lampetie. Again, the female role of guarding the prize of worthy men. These are the maidens of initiation. But Odysseus' crew transgresses and kills the bull. They defy Odysseus' orders on account of hunger and are punished. All will perish in a storm sent by Zeus, except Odysseus himself, whose journey home is now to be delayed. The clamoring, the many voices of the mind and body, the passions, in this case literally hunger, lead to premature initiation, like facing the cross again without having fasted in the desert, per the example of Jesus. slaying the animal self when it isn't subdued, when we aren't worthy of that, when we are still subject to the unruly mind, Odysseus's crew, the hungry, the passionate, leads to failure. But in a sense, now Odysseus has learnt a valuable lesson. He may detach from his crew, they are dead after all, and go on alone. When he arrives home, finally, he does not let the same mistake play out twice. His slaughter of the suitors that want his wife is equivalent to Zeus killing off his crew, for they would do to his home what the crew did to the cattle of the sun, and they would violate Penelope like his crew disregarded the daughters of Helios, of the god of the sun. Penelope's dream turns out to be correct. Odysseus was in fact returning, although she didn't know it, and since true dreams come from horn, we may say Odysseus has integrated the animal self after all, the sacred bull. His crew, as an extension of him, did so unworthily, but he purified their mistake by having this long delay in his journey, going through all of these experiences and so on. Another transgressor who stole the cattle of the sun from Apollo is Hermes in the Homeric hymn. He is born in a mountain from a nymph, Maia, equivalent to other holy mountains, and steals the sacred animals. But he does not eat their flesh despite being tempted to do so. So unlike the crew of Odysseus, this was not motivated by hunger, the passions, weakness before the instincts. That's crucial, even if it was premature because without the permission of Apollo. Hermes sacrifices 2 of the cattle. Instinct is dual, desire and disgust, affection and aversion, hope and fear. Then he distributes their remains. Specifically, he divides these into 12 parts, placing himself between 12. 12 as the number of ordered diversity. Christ and his disciples, the 12 gates of the heavenly city in the Apocalypse. 12 is the maximum number of spheres that can touch a central sphere of the same size, etc. This 12-part distribution is a dismemberment of his own animal or ordinary self. Following the removal of our body from our perception, suspension of ordinary phenomenal perception, we enter contemplation. Hermes now returns to the mountain of his birth with his mother and wraps himself in a cradle, the tomb/womb of contemplation. But the element of transgression is not absent. Hermes must now reconcile with Apollo. The psyche, soul, has suspended its animal self and now reconciles with its own spirit, its nous in Greek terms. The two go to Zeus, and eventually Hermes tells Apollo the truth. Hermes gives Apollo his lyre, the creative voice is given over to a higher spiritual principle, and Apollo gives Hermes dominion, the sort of mastery that is received when we submit to the higher, in the form of a whip to keep the grazing animals, the instincts, in order, and a staff, which usually symbolizes authority. If we turn to the story of Medea and Jason the Argonaut, we find that Medea is a similar figure, yes, to Penelope, but also to the daughters of the sun, because she herself is a descendant of Helios, of the sun god. Jason is a descendant of Hermes, and he's also engaged in the quest for a sacrificial solar beast, namely the golden fleece. He wants the golden fleece. It's a symbol of the animal self, purified, slain, integrated. And so he gathers a crew, the Argonauts, which includes Hercules, and sails to Lemnos in search of the golden fleece. Now, the women of that island neglect the veneration of Aphrodite, we are told. We may say that they have rejected the feminine ideal. So Aphrodite turns them foul of smell. The female ideal, in this case, beauty, turns those who reject it foul, merely by comparison, perhaps. But now their husbands seek the women of Thrace, the land of Orpheus, and so these scorned wives kill their husbands in retaliation. The proper relation of the sexes has collapsed. Later, in another episode, Jason will kill the harpies that have been appointed to eat the meals of one king, Phineus, and given the female character of harpies, we may understand this as a struggle against the sort of corruption afflicting the wives of Lemnos. He's struggling against corrupted femininity. In return for his help, King Phineus instructs Jason on how to arrive safely at Colchis, Colchis, where the golden fleece waits for him. And there a woman, Medea, anoints him like a king so that the heat from fire-breathing oxen does not burn him. The bull is often solar, as we've seen, belonging to Helios or Apollo, but in this case, it's in its infernal mode, as a dragon, a test, a beast of trial for the hero. Now Medea goes on to instruct Jason on how to defeat these beasts, and sure enough, Jason overcomes his final trial, slays the dragon, using a potion given to him by Medea. Medea also helps Jason escape her own father and household, but she kills her own brother to do so. So she's disloyal to her original family, and so Zeus sends a storm to scourge their ship, and purification for Medea's transgression has to be sought. So yeah, the women of Lemnos, yeah, the harpies, but Medea herself, in a sense, is also an example of corrupted femininity. She's supposed to be the guide for Jason, and she is, but she's an imperfect guide. Jason finally overcomes other difficulties with her help, but he ends up deciding to marry one Creusa, the heiress of Corinth, for political reasons, and he breaks his vow to Medea to marry her. So Medea poisons his wife-to-be and kills her own children so that he will have no progeny, leaving on a chariot of dragons sent by Helios, by the sun god, her grandfather. And Jason now loses the favor of Hera. His whole enterprise literally rots and crushes him when a piece of the Argo, his ship, collapses and kills him in his sleep. So Jason and Medea are imperfect male and female figures. With the tale of the Argonauts, we get something important. The figure of a sacrificial solar bull is in continuity with, can shift into, the hellish dragon figure. Such are the bulls at Colchis, the Calcotauroi, made by Hephaestus, gifted to the king of that land, which Medea helps Jason overcome. But then Euripides tells us that Medea leaves Corinth on a chariot driven by dragons, after she has turned vengeful and committed a terrible crime. We may see these dragons not as benevolent, but indeed infernal. The solar bulls turned fire-breathing that she helped Jason overcome, now in full draconian bloom. The same association occurs in Virgil's Aeneid before the devastating fall of Troy. In Book 2, the priest of the Trojans, and it was on a rolling basis, but the guy who was officiating as priest at the time, Laocoon, is performing or about to perform a bull sacrifice when he is attacked by sea serpents or dragons, flaming crested, sputtering fire, and so the sacrifice is interrupted. Troy isn't worthy. The depths are wild and produce dragons to devour their priest. We could say the soul, the psyche, is chaotic. We cannot engage properly in the sacrifice of the animal self. Thereafter, the city is destroyed by fire from a people from across the sea. Trojans were not worthy of the solar animal. Instead of receiving light, they receive a burning fire. Later on, Aeneas faces the waters, chaos. He's shipwrecked, he sails south and west and north, finally arriving at his destiny in Italy. There, he sacrifices bulls at the instruction of the priestess of Apollo, the Sibyl of the sun. This is a solar bull sacrifice, and is able to enter the underworld, see the paradisial realms, and return to the earth with new insight. He does, in Book 6, what the priest Laocoon could not do in Book 2 because he has been purged. You can sacrifice the animal self, but only after you've tamed it. Otherwise, you're not worthy of the solar bull or the submissive lamb. You haven't been able to render it pure. You have to undergo the 40 days of fasting in the desert before you can face the cross without going insane, without being dragged off by the serpent, by the devil, as occurs to Laocoon. By the way, the dragon-like bovine figure that Jason faces also occurs in Chinese culture. You have the Qilin that the Yellow Emperor, the quintessential hero of China, faces at one point. It's a sort of dragon with hoofed feet like an ox. Heracles will actually capture the bull Poseidon gave to Minos during one of his labors and sends it to Eurystheus, but the bull breaks free and is eventually sacrificed by Theseus himself before he faces the Minotaur. Because that bull was initially intended for Minos specifically and ends up roaming wild again after Heracles and is recaptured by another, this is a secondary encounter to Heracles' later main encounter with the oxen of the sun. Heracles faces the giant Geryon, who has stolen the oxen of the sun, the holy solar bulls of Helios, and taken them to the far west. The west is associated with death, the setting sun, during his 10th labor. So that's the false self, the false priority of the body over the mind or the spirit, the titanic ego that takes the energies of the animal self, our instincts, away from us. He has to be overcome by Hercules. Then, during the 11th labor, Hercules may face the dragon, Ladon, to get the apples of immortality, the golden apples of the Hesperides. And we can map these onto the paradigm of the gospel as well. By the 10th labor, Heracles has undergone many trials equivalent to the 40-day fast. He can defeat Geryon, who appears to be a ruler in the far west. So that's resisting the devil's temptations, power, but also the authority of the Sanhedrin, of the Romans. He retrieves the holy cattle. That's the slaying and glorification of the lamb, the animal self on the cross. Defeat the dragon, Ladon, that's the overcoming of death, facing death, enter the underworld, and returns again, which is the 12th trial, equivalent to the resurrection. On one level, the dragon is that serpent labyrinth of the Minotaur. It's what happens when we do not slay the animal self. The reptilian instincts, we could say, take over more and more because we didn't tame the mammalian faculties, so to speak. But the dragon is also just that deeper foe we may defeat when we have faced the animal self and integrated it. There's always some challenge after the bull sacrifice, after all, frequently associated with keeping the hero from his wife or future wife. So Heracles, for example, faces the dragon Ladon to get the Hesperides eventually to marry Hebe, the cupbearer of the gods, after he has recovered the oxen of the sun. Odysseus slays the pretenders who want Penelope after doing penance for his crew's eating of the oxen of the sun and having his return prophesied by a gate of horns. Aeneas defeats Turnus, who wanted the Latin princess Lavinia for himself, who Aeneas eventually marries, after the bull sacrifice at the Apollonian temple in the south, in Naples. So the dragon isn't always a dragon, but it is that agency which keeps the hero from fully engaging with the world, becoming nature, the realm, which is to say the feminine. And it can only be faced properly and defeated after the hero has integrated his animal self, the submissive lamb, the solar bull, etc., the horse of the Rig Veda. But this he can only do after rendering that animal self holy, which is to say, purging himself, and that requires a quest, a fast, discipline, mortification, etc. That's the order of things. Tolkien presents us with an interesting paradigm for understanding the dragon in The Hobbit, because Smaug, the dragon that occupies the mountain of the dwarves, comes from the north. Since the sun's arc is southern from the northern hemisphere, the south represents light, waking awareness, and the north, darkness, contemplation. When contemplation ceases, when it is darkened, corrupted, we get the dragon, and we have some indication in the Silmarillion that the devil of Tolkien's world, Morgoth, created dragons. So this is a satanic agency. It occupies the sacred mountain, Sinai, Mount Ida in Crete, the body. The productive powers of the body, the forgers, these are the instincts that we want to tame, the dwarves, are driven out, and the treasure, all that energy that is in the body, is hoarded by this false self, by this dragon, Smaug, who's equivalent to the pretenders occupying the house of Odysseus, Turnus, and those who oppose the Trojans in the Aeneid to some degree. The way in which Bilbo Baggins overcomes is through a descent, a katabasis. He goes into the darkness of the mountain. Like Hercules, like Aeneas, there's a descent. Quote, "It was at this point that Bilbo stopped. Going on from there was the bravest thing he ever did. He fought the real battle in the tunnel alone before he ever saw the vast danger that lay in wait." An unaccountable desire seized hold of him to rush out and reveal himself and tell all the truth to Smaug, end quote. Defeating the dragon is having enough of an inner witness that we don't give in to the desire to run. Contemplative spiritual practice can be very scary on some level. So, tame the beast, render it a holy solar animal that's embracing challenges, a disciplined life, virtue to make the body and mind submissive to the spirit and to the moral will. Slay the beast, that's entering actual contemplation in which the ordinary movements of the mind subside, we don't react to the body, contemplative prayer, meditation. And after we have achieved that contemplation, at some point we will encounter a violent reaction against us. That's for another video, but that would be the dragon. Either we encounter it because we have slain the animal self, or we are forced to encounter it prior to that because we have lived an undisciplined life. The dragon is either a challenge that the hero sets himself up for, as with Hercules and Aeneas and so on, Odysseus, or the dragon is something that is forced upon him, as in the case of the dwarves in Tolkien. So we have a hierarchy of heroes. The clear failure of Minos, the initial success followed by failure of Jason, success albeit ambiguous of Theseus, clear success in the case of Heracles, Odysseus, Aeneas, although there's ambiguity because of the conditions of the death of Heracles, but overall a success. There's a whole other topic relating to the cosmic sacrifice, the sacrifice that founds the cosmos, the being whose sacrifice allows for the universe to be made out of its parts. You have this in the Rig Veda, where there are parallels drawn between the horse sacrifice and the sacrifice of the cosmic man Purusha. You have it in Mithraism, the sacrifice of the bull is very much the cosmic foundation. You have this in Norse mythology, where the sacrifice of the giant Ymir allows Odin and his brothers to make the world, but Ymir is associated with the cosmic cow, so he is a bull figure in some sense, perhaps. Now, this is not a cosmic theory of recycling energy. To make the universe, you have to kill something else. At least, that's not its inner spiritual significance, albeit it can end up meaning that. Rather, the point is that when we sacrifice ourself, that which claims priority over us, the overwhelming dominance of the mind-body, when we remove that from our perception, we can perceive that which is essential as what is manifesting in other wider structures. And so the world is made from that sacrifice. Yes, we realize that the world corresponds to the parts of us, that different parts of reality correspond to different parts of the human composite. Thus, the idea of the macro-anthropos, the macro-human, the cosmos as human, and the overcoming of the false priority which the body, mind, the psychosomatic self, the animal self seemed to have. When it seems to have priority, it's corrupted and it gives in to that, to the dragon, right? It's untamed, therefore the dragon takes over. The dwarves aren't ordered, therefore Smaug comes in. The white bull isn't slaughtered, therefore the Minotaur is engendered, and so on. When we lose our north, contemplation, spiritual perception, the dragon moves in. Rather than having a transcendent origin, we view base elements of nature as primary over us. Thus the myth of Saturn devouring his children, or Satan refusing to bow to humanity and recognize its centrality in Jewish Apocrypha and in the Quran. Okay, I ended up focusing on Greek myth and the Aeneid as well as the Gospel rather than drawing on other traditions as well in modern media because there was a lot to say, but this is a companion video to the female heroism one. I'm not, by the way, claiming the meaning of these symbols discussed here is how every author and historian who passed them on understood them, but symbolism and pattern just occurs. And we could have found them in other traditions. You have the idea of fasting in the wilderness or exile as a purgative phase culminating in the defeat of evil all over the place. In the Quran, for example, references to the exile in Medina prior to Muhammad's conquest of Mecca, the Indian tradition as well. Okay, As always, thank you very much for watching. Consider supporting this channel on Substack, buy me a coffee if you'd like me to keep making videos, subscribe if you would like to, and until next time.